Welcome back, everyone. This is Austin Reville with 2FxC Tactical on our From the Vault series, featuring unique and historical firearms that come through our shop and in our personal collection. And we have another really awesome piece for you today. With that being said, thank you to all of our subscribers. Please like, comment, subscribe, share. You can check us on Patreon if you'd like to support the channel. We very much appreciate all that. It's allowed us to upgrade our equipment and also just to see the explosion of our channel. We want to continue to grow this. We're going to shamelessly continue to plug for that Smith & Wesson sponsorship you see behind me there. But in reality, we're very thankful for everyone who tunes in. This is a lot of fun, and we really enjoy bringing this to you. Today we have an iconic weapon, one that really needs no introduction. We have the SKS platform. Now, it was designed by Sergei Simonov in 1943 to 1944. He technically worked on versions of this as early as 1941, though that was chambered in the 7.62x5.4R cartridge, very similar to the same cartridge, I should say, that was being used in the Mosin Nagant, most famously, and of course the SVT-40, which of course I have one right here, SVT-40, semi-automatic rifle of World War II for the Russians. As you can see, a much larger platform, full battle full battle rifle with a full rifle length cartridge. There were this is the SVT semi-auto version of it. There was the AVT, which was the automatic version of this rifle. There were some complaints about its controllability. It's obviously a heavier weapon than the SKS, with its overall length being bigger and made to take a larger cartridge. So the Russians in 1943 would capture a large amount of the 8mm Kurz round for the MP43 and later the STG-44 weapon systems that the Germans were implementing. And this mid-tier cartridge really intrigued them, and they started experimenting with it, and they were really impressed with it. So they decided to redesign this 8mm Kurz into the modern 7.62x3.9 caliber. So taking this down to this is the idea. So while the SVT-40, which is a video for another time, we should certainly do, was the main semi-auto rifle of World War II. By the time they redesigned this caliber, this 8mm Kurz caliber, it really brought that 1941 version of this rifle that Simonov was working on into a more realistic play. Now, Kalashnikov would also produce a semi-auto variant for that cartridge. He ultimately would, of course, develop the AK-47 rifle. This is a Wazir 10. This is actually a select fire post sample. We will certainly do a video on all this as well in the future, but this is the weapon system that Kalashnikov would ultimately go with in the same round. There are a lot of similarities between these two weapon systems. Very interesting in how they came into being, though this has more in common with the M1 Grand. But again, video for another time. But this is what he would develop in 1947, whereas this would go enter trials in 1944, 1945. They would not see the field. They were still in trials when the Germans surrendered in 1945. But it showed great promise. So there's some upgrades being made. So while the SVT-40 was certainly being used by the Russians, the main battle weapon of the Russians was, of course, the M9130 Mosin Nagant. It's a large, full-length rifle cartridge, bolt-action rifle. The 91 stands for 1891. That's when this was originally designed. The 30 was the 1930 update. This particular one is from 1931. Excuse me, 1937. Misread that. But this is what most Russians were using. If you ever watch Enemy of the Gates, you're going to see a lot of these, because again, this is the issued weapon at the time. Now, the Germans were obviously using the K98K, so this 5-round internal magazine bolt-action rifle matched up somewhat similar to the K98K, though with it being much longer, does hinder it. Moving towards the semi-auto side of things, the Russians knew early on that they needed to develop a semi-automatic rifle. That's why the SVT-38 and the 40 would come into play. They were complex and expensive. They ultimately did not implement them as many as, like, say, we did M1 Grands or Garands. This would come into play in the 50s and really come home in the Korean and Vietnam Wars. At least against us, I should say. We got very familiar with these platforms. So this one's from 1954. So this is a somewhat early production. These would enter full production in 1949, and they would be used all the way up through the 1960s. This is somewhat of a short-lived rifle for the Russians in terms of them using it as a frontline unit rifle. They, of course, would end up going with the AK-47, ultimately the AK-74, AKMs, the variations on that. These do have some similar features when you take a peek at them, especially when you look at how the wood and foregrip all meshes, the piston gas system, all as well as some of the internal mechanisms, even kind of the bolt in some instances. When you look at the AK, you can certainly see some similarities from the front of the rifle. That is kind of where this would end, though, in many ways. Again, this has more in common with the M1 Grand, where this has more in common with, say, maybe the Gewehr 43 in a lot of ways than it would over the M1 Grand. So this is a Mauser system in the sense that it locks open on empty. It's a stripper clip fed gun. That means you can feed top down into the internal 10-round magazine with stripper clips. This one does feature the nice Tula Star right there, as well as on the stock. Now, as you notice, there's two sets of serial numbers there. One that is crossed out. This is a 1951 stock that was force matched to this rifle. So this is not the original stock on this rifle. For whatever reason, this was restamped by the Arsenal to match this gun. It does feature a fixed bayonet. That is a typical feature of these guns. I do have one, but I don't have one here with me. One of the major differences between the Chinese Type 56 versions of this gun is the bayonet. Where this is a bladed bayonet, the Chinese versions would feature a spiked bayonet. The Yugoslavians would also feature a bladed bayonet. So that is just one of the differences between the two countries as they implemented this. When it comes to, let me just use that. There we go. When it comes to the service of this weapon, the Russians certainly would use this, but this would really shine in some ways in Korea. We were using M1 Grands and really World War II technology in Korea. The Chinese and the North Koreans were using Russian Soviet technology, and while yes, this was born in design in World War II, it was a post-war implementation. This would give you 2 extra rounds over M1 Grand. It's lighter. You could certainly carry more ammo because the caliber is smaller than the 36. The in-block clip and the stripper clip, yeah, the in-block clip is a little faster. I would make the argument to load. It's certainly not a great increase of speed. We have seen, post-war productions, and even, to be fair, there were some modified versions of these in Vietnam that take like AK mags, so it wasn't an internal round magazine anymore. They did kind of tinker around with select fire versions of these, but they were predominantly semi-auto when they entered the field. Where this would really gain fame is in Vietnam. The North Vietnamese would use these, both Russian and Chinese variants of this gun. The Type 56 Chinese version. They're virtually identical with the exception of the bayonet and, of course, the markings and stampings on it. In terms of their overall function, they're identical. I know that there's some arguments, well, the Russian one's better. To be honest with you, I have both. I've shot both. There's not really a major difference between the two of them. They're both made to pretty much the same specs. So I'm probably the wrong person to talk to about that. I mean, there's Russian diehards, of course. The Chinese are considered inferior as gun makers. And in some ways that's true, but predominantly I would say they are very similar. These are, like I said, these are semi-automatic operated systems. This is your dust cover. You would pull this up to pop the dust cover off, remove the bolt. It's all got the fixed spring. Again, is very AK-like on the inside. You can certainly see that these two were developed kind of concurrently with one another, and there's many similarities from that from the manufacturing perspective. You would have your cleaning kit right here in the butt, very similar to the weapon systems of the time to make that easy. This one does have one in there. Right there. You would just have all of it right in the little pod. And of course that goes right back into the hole. And the flap is spring assisted and closes on the end. The selector switch system is right here on the trigger well. Up is safe, down is fire. And where the AK, of course, has the dust cover that operates the safety selector. As far as what these guns would go on and do, these are actually kind of impressive considering the fact that it's a rifle, but its overall length is much shorter. More in line with like the M16 of the time. So in some ways, this matched up quite well, despite the fact it has an internal 10-round magazine versus the detachable 20 of the M16A1. Semi-auto versus select fire. It did make your shots more accurate just because it is semi-auto versus just kind of the spray and pray style that we saw the United States employ in war during Vietnam. There's a lot of famous pictures of North Vietnamese holding various SKS variants. When it comes to the other countries like Yugoslavia and all, you're seeing those like pop up in Ukraine right now. Certainly still using SKSs around the world. You certainly see them in Africa and even South America. The Contras, for instance, did use some variations of these, as well as Pablo Escobar's guys had SKSs. You kind of see them all over. They are very prominent. This is one of the cool things about this gun is they're legal in all 50 states. There's very few, quote-unquote, modern sporting rifles, semi-auto rifles that are legal in all 50 states. And while, yes, the SKS is hard to call a modern sporting rifle in the sense that it was designed in the 1940s, went into production in the 1940s, and really would cease to see mainline front-end service from its original producers of both China and Russia by the 1960s as they moved on to, say, the AK-47 and their variations there. They would still linger on, and this is cool that you can own them in all 50 states. Now, yes, sometimes the bayonets have to come off, but you can own the rifle itself. Now, when it comes to the United States civilian market, that's really where these things have taken off. You see this less today just because the importation of these rifles, because they're Chinese and Russian predominantly made, and we have import bans from China since 1989 and then Russia since 2014, which prohibits the importation of firearms from those countries. It makes it difficult to get these in the United States. We are seeing the Chinese ones pop up more and more often as that 30 years in a neutral country mark is starting to be hit. With that being said, the civilian market has made multiple adaptations and upgrades to this rifle. You can get all polymer chassis and place the the receiver and barrel all in all polymer chassis. Some of them give you pistol grips. Some of them give you folding stocks. You can modify them to take detachable magazines. You can get extended internal magazines. There's 20-round internal magazines. In fact, I have a Chinese stamped internal magazine with a red star on my Chinese one. So there are various versions of this that kind of updated and modernized it for the civilian market. These are still used as hunting rifles, believe it or not, in the United States by a lot of people. 7.62 by 3.9 is not a bad deer round. It is a 30 cal round. So these have seen life well beyond the military field, but they are still serving the military field. Again, I've seen pictures in Ukraine concurrently with these rifles being used. So definitely has a long-lasting service. So I guess Sergei would be quite proud of what became of his weapons platform, I assume, and the fact that it's still being used and implemented and somewhat relevant in today. pop culture has made these things famous. We're seeing these in video games pop up over and over and over again. The Call of Duty Black Ops series, especially 1, 2, and recently, was it Cold War, which I guess is 5, that does deal in Vietnam. These are options. Obviously, the multiplayer, these are options because they're period correct guns, so very easily recognizable. But with that being said, I am glad you kind of checked in to check these out, because very cool guns, very unique, did serve multiple countries, though they really didn't serve their own countries in mainland combat, really. I mean, they did a little bit. Russia, certainly, probably in Afghanistan in the 1970s, probably had some of these that were used, but predominantly they served in proxy wars with proxies against the United States, predominantly. So that's where these things do kind of get a little interesting, the fact that we saw them in combat, just not really with the armies that they were originally intended to be implemented with. But I do hope you enjoyed this. Like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.